The global economy depends on this narrow strip of water. Every day, ships pass through here, carrying the fuel that powers entire nations. It looks routine. But if this flow is disrupted, oil prices rise, inflation returns, and the world feels the impact.
When a major crisis erupts somewhere in the world, our attention usually snaps to the military and the politics. But just beneath the surface, a whole different kind of shockwave starts to travel, one that can find its way right into your wallet, no matter where you happen to live. So today, we're going to peel back the layers of the conflict itself and trace the economic ripple effects of this crisis in the Persian Gulf. You'll see just how far those ripples can really travel.
Okay, so to really get the economic side of things, we've got to be on the same page about what kicked all this off. It all escalated, and it escalated fast. You had major strikes inside Iran, which were then followed by Iran's own missile and drone attacks in retaliation. Then, things got even more intense with the death of Iran's supreme leader. Now, with all the chaos in the air and on the seas, there's a faint signal about de-escalation, but honestly, the economic dominoes have already started to fall.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll start at the very center, the crisis in the Gulf itself. Then we'll follow those ripples out to the oil choke point, see how that creates an inflation shockwave, then watch the surprising reaction in the financial markets, what's called a flight to safety. And finally, we'll ask what all of this means for the long-term reign of the US dollar.
Right, let's start with that first ripple. The best way to think about this whole thing is like dropping a stone into a perfectly still pond. The splash itself is right there where the stone hits, but the rings? Those rings just keep spreading outwards, eventually touching every single part of the pond. And that pond is the global economy.
That very first ripple, the most powerful one, is all about the physical world. It's the immediate, real-world danger to the ships, the planes, and all the infrastructure that actually moves stuff around the globe. And in this specific part of the world, that boils down to one thing above pretty much everything else: energy.
And that brings us to what is basically the world's energy artery. This whole crisis puts a massive amount of pressure on one single, narrow strip of water that has a ridiculously huge impact on what you and I pay for gas. We are, of course, talking about the Strait of Hormuz. You see, it's the only way for ships to get from the Persian Gulf out into the open ocean. For the entire global energy market, it is, without a doubt, the most critical choke point on the planet. Its stability is pretty much directly tied to the stability of the global economy. It's that simple.
And just to give you a sense of the scale here, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. A full 20%, that's 1/5, of all the oil the entire world uses every single day sails right through this one tiny little strait. So, when that gets threatened, you're not just causing a local problem, you're messing with a huge slice of the world's entire energy supply.
So what does a threat like that actually do to prices? Well, we can game out a few scenarios. Just with continued disruptions, higher insurance, naval patrols, ships having to take the long way around, prices are going to spike. But a full blockade, if that happens, we'd see a huge chunk of oil vanish from the market overnight. That would send prices into the stratosphere, to levels we haven't seen in decades.
This next ripple, this is where the crisis really starts to hit home for basically everyone, everywhere. A spike in oil isn't just about what you pay at the pump. No, it triggers an inflation shockwave that works its way into every single part of the economy.
It's a domino effect, and it's simple and it's brutal. First, crude oil prices jump. Right away, that makes transportation more expensive. We're talking trucks, ships, planes, you name it. That then makes it more expensive to make almost everything, from the plastics in your phone to the fertilizer for our food. And the final domino? Higher prices on pretty much everything you buy, which fuels inflation all around the world. So yeah, the key takeaway is a crisis way over there leads directly to a higher bill at your local grocery store.
Okay, so now we follow that ripple into the financial markets. And this is where something really fascinating and kind of weird happens. When there's this much uncertainty in the world, big money doesn't just scatter to the winds. It runs. And it almost always runs to the same few places.
Which brings us to a huge paradox. In a global crisis that involves the United States, either directly or indirectly, how in the world does the US dollar, the currency of that very country, often get stronger? I know, it seems totally backwards, but it turns out there's a really interesting reason why.
The answer comes down to what the market calls the twin pillars of safety. First up, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. Most international business is done in dollars, so when things get scary, everybody needs dollars just to keep the lights on.
And second, you have US Treasury bonds. They're seen as the ultimate safe place to park money. It's basically a loan to the US government. Investors see it as the safest lockbox on Earth, so money from all over the world just floods in, which pushes the value of the dollar way up.
And that leads us to the final widest ripple, the big, long-term strategic questions. Because while the dollar gets a short-term boost, a crisis like this also puts the entire US-led financial system under a microscope, and it forces other major countries to seriously ask themselves if they're too reliant on it. There's a quote from one geopolitical analyst that just nails it. Every crisis is a stress test for the prevailing system. The system we have now, built around the dollar, was designed for a specific kind of world. And every new shock, every new crisis tests its limits and pushes other countries to start thinking about, well, Plan B.
So this right here is the real tug-of-war, the core tension of this whole situation. In the short term, that flight to safety makes the dollar even more powerful. The system works just like it's supposed to. But in the long term, this very event could speed up what's called de-dollarization, where countries like China and Russia actively look for ways to protect themselves from these kinds of US-centric risks. So in a weird way, the event reinforces the dollar's power today, while maybe, just maybe, chipping away at its foundation for tomorrow.
And that leaves us with the final, absolutely crucial question. Is this just another stress test that the dollar-based global system will pass, proving how resilient it is one more time? Or is this the kind of event that creates a tiny crack in the foundation, a crack that, over time, starts to spread? The answer to that is going to define the economic world for all of us for years to come.